Stories like the foregoing represent the incrustations that have attached themselves to the body of Christianity during the centuries. The popular mind itself has been the self-appointed guardian and perpetrator of these legends, bitterly opposing every effort to divest the faith of these questionable accumulations. While popular tradition often contains certain basic elements of truth, these elements are usually distorted out of all proportion. Thus, while the generalities of the story may be fundamentally true, the details are hopelessly erroneous. Of truth as of beauty, it may be said that it is most adorned when unadorned, through the mist of fantastic accounts which obscure the true foundation of the Christian faith, it is faintly visible to the discerning few a great and noble doctrine communicated to the world by a great and noble soul. Joseph and Mary, two devout and holy-minded souls, consecrated to the service of God and dreaming of the coming of a Messiah to serve Israel, obeyed the injunctions of the high priest of the Essenes to prepare a body for the coming of a great soul. Thus, an immaculate conception, Jesus was born. By immaculate is meant clean rather than supernatural. Jesus was reared and educated by the Essenes and later initiated into the most profound of their mysteries. Like all great initiates, he must travel in an easterly direction, and the silent years of his life, no doubt, were spent in familiarizing himself with the secret teaching, later to be communicated by him to the world. Having consummated the aesthetic practices of his order, he attained to the christening. Having thus reunited himself with his own spiritual source, he then went forth in the name of the one who has been crucified since before the worlds were, and gathering about him disciples and apostles, he instructed them in that secret teaching which had been lost, in part at least, from the doctrines of Israel. His fate is unknown, but in all probability he suffered that persecution which is the lot of those who seek to reconstruct the ethical, philosophical, or religious systems of their day. To the multitudes, Jesus spoke in parables. To his disciples, he also spoke in parables, though of a more exalted and philosophic nature. Voltaire said that Plato should have been canonized by the Christian Church, for, being the first propounder of the Christos mysteries, he contributed more to its fundamental doctrines than any other single individual. Jesus disclosed to his disciples that the lower world is under the control of a great spiritual being which had fashioned it according to the will of the eternal Father. The mind of this great angel was both the mind of the world and also the worldly mind, so that men should not die of worldliness. The eternal Father sent unto creation the eldest and most exalted of his powers, the divine mind. The divine mind offered itself as living sacrifice and was broken up and eaten by the world. Having given its spirit and its body at a secret and sacred supper to the 12 manners of rational creatures, this divine mind became a part of every living thing. Man was thereby enabled to use this power as a bridge across which he might pass and attain immortality. He who lifted up his soul to the divine mind and served it was righteous, and having attained righteousness, liberated the divine mind, which thereupon returned again in glory to its own divine source. And because he had brought to them this knowledge, the disciples said to one another, Lo, he is himself this mind personified. The Arthurian cycle and legend of the Holy Grail. According to the legend, the body of the Christos, the spiritual law, was given into the keeping of two men, of whom the Gospels make but brief mention. These were Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, both devout men who, though not listed among the disciples or apostles of the Christos, were all men chosen to be custodians of his sacred remains. Joseph of Arimathea was one of the initiated brethren, and it is called by A.E. Waite in his new Encyclopedia of Freemasonry the first bishop of Christendom. Just as the temporal or visible power of the Holy See was established by St. Peter, so the spiritual or invisible body of the faith was entrusted to the secret church of the Holy Grail through apostolic succession from Joseph of Arimathea, into whose keeping had been given the perpetual symbols of the covenant, the ever-flowing cup and the bleeding spear. Presumably obeying instructions of St. Philip, Joseph of Arimathea, carrying the sacred relics, reached Britain after passing through many and varied hardships. Here a site was allotted to him for the erection of a church, and in this manner Glastonbury Abbey was founded. Joseph planted his staff in the earth, and it took root, becoming a miraculous thorn bush, which blossomed twice a year, and which is now called the Glastonbury thorn. The end of the life of Joseph of Arimathea is unknown. By some, it is believed that, like Enoch, he was translated; by others, that he was buried in Glastonbury Abbey. Repeated attempts have been made to find the Holy Grail, which many believe to have been hidden in a crypt beneath the ancient abbey. The Glastonbury chalice, recently discovered and by the devout supposed to be the original sangreal, can scarcely be accepted as genuine by the critical investigator. Beyond its inherent interest as a relic, like the famous Antioch chalice, it actually proves nothing when it is realized that practically little more is known about the Christian mysteries 18 centuries ago than can be discovered today. The origin of the Grail myth, as of nearly every other element in the great drama, is curiously elusive. Sufficient foundation for it may be found in the folklore of the British Isles, which contains many accounts of magic cauldrons, kettles, cups, and drinking horns. The earliest Grail legends describe the cup as a veritable horn of plenty. Its contents were inexhaustible, and those who served it never hungered or thirsted. One account states that no matter how desperately ill a person might be, he could not die within 8 days of beholding the cup. Some authorities believe the Holy Grail to be the perpetuation of the holy cup used in the rites of Adonis and Attis. A communion cup or chalice was used in several of the ancient mysteries, and the god Bacchus is frequently symbolized in the form of a vase, cup, or urn. In nature, worship the ever-flowing Grail signifies the bounty of the harvest by which the life of man is sustained. Like Mercury's bottomless pitcher, it is the inexhaustible fountain of natural resource. From the evidence at hand, it would indeed be erroneous to ascribe a purely Christian origin to the Grail symbolism. In the Arthurian cycle appears a strange and mysterious figure, Merlin the magician. In one of the legends concerning him, it is declared that when Jesus was sent to liberate the world from the bondage of evil, the adversary determined to send an antichrist to undo his labors. The devil, therefore, in the form of a horrible dragon, overshadowed a young woman who had taken refuge in a sanctuary to escape the evil which had destroyed her family. When Merlin, her child, was born, he partook of the characteristics of his human mother and demon father. Merlin, however, did not serve the powers of darkness, but being converted to the true light, retained only 2 of the supernatural powers inherited from his father: prophecy and miracle working. The story of Merlin's infernal father must really be considered as an allegorical allusion to the fact that he was a philosophical son of the serpent or dragon. The title applied to all initiates of the mysteries who thus acknowledge nature as their mortal mother and wisdom in the form of the serpent or dragon as their immortal father. Confusion of the dragon and serpent with the powers of evil has resulted in an inevitable consequence from misinterpretation of the early chapters of Genesis. Arthur, while an infant, was given into the keeping of Merlin the mage, and in his youth instructed by him in the secret doctrine, and probably initiated into the deepest secrets of natural magic. With Merlin's assistance, Arthur became the leading general of Britain, a degree of dignity which has been confused with kingship. After Arthur had drawn the sword of Branstock from the anvil and thus established his divine right to leadership, Merlin further assisted him to secure from the Lady of the Lake the sacred sword Excalibur. After the establishment of the Round Table, having fulfilled his duty, Merlin disappeared, according to one account, vanishing into the air, where he still exists as a shadow, communicating at will with mortals, according to another, retiring of his own accord into a great stone vault, which he sealed from within. It is reasonably certain that many legends regarding Charlemagne were later associated with Arthur, who is most famous for establishing the Order of the Round Table at Winchester. Reliable information is not to be had concerning the ceremonies and initiatory rituals of the Round Table. In one story, the table was endowed with the powers of expansion and contraction so that 15 or 1,500 could be seated around it, according to whatever need might arise. The most common accounts fixed the number of knights who could be seated at one time at the round table at either 12 or 24. The 12 signified the signs of the zodiac and also the apostles of Jesus. The knights' names and also their heraldic arms were emblazoned upon their chairs. When 24 are shown seated at the table, each of the 12 signs of the zodiac is divided into two parts, a light and a dark half, to signify the nocturnal and diurnal phases of each sign. As each sign of the zodiac is ascending for 2 hours every day, so the 24 Knights represent the hours, the 24 elders before the throne of revelation, and 24 Persian deities who represent the spirits of the divisions of the day. In the center of the table was the symbolic rose of the passion of our Lord Jesus Christ, the symbol of resurrection, in that he rose from the dead. There was also a mysterious empty seat called the Sage Paralius, in which none might sit except he who was successful in his quest for the Holy Grail. In the personality of Arthur is to be found a new form of the ever-recurrent cosmic myth. The Prince of Britain is the sun, his knights are the zodiac, and his dragons of darkness. No. His knights are the zodiac, and his flashing sword may be the sun's rays with which he fights and vanquishes the dragons of darkness, or it may represent the earth's axis. Arthur's round table is the universe, the Siege Paralius, the throne of the perfect man. In its terrestrial sense, Arthur was the Grand Master of a secret Christian Masonic brotherhood of philosophic mystics who termed themselves knights. Arthur received the exalted position of Grand Master of these knights because he had faithfully accomplished the withdrawal of the sword spirit from the anvil of the base metals, his lower nature. As invariably happens, the historical Arthur soon was confused with the allegories and myths of his order until now the two are inseparable. After Arthur's death on the field of Camblin, his mysteries ceased, and esoterically, he was borne away on a black barge, as is so beautifully described by Tennyson in his Morte d'Arthur. The great sword Excalibur was also cast back into the waters of eternity, all of which is a vivid portrayal of the descent of cosmic night at the end of the day of universal manifestation. The body of the historical Arthur was probably interred at Glastonbury Abbey, a building closely identified with the mystic rites of both the Grail and the Arthurian cycle. The medieval Rosicrucians were undoubtedly in possession of the true secret of the Arthurian cycle and the Grail legend, much of their symbolism having been incorporated into that order. Though the most obvious of all keys to the Christos mystery, the Grail legend has received the least consideration. Next, chapter 42, the cross and the crucifixion in pagan and Christian mysticism.